Perhaps the biggest threat to national competitiveness is a combination of our public education system and our immigration policy. Right now there are about 2 million unfilled, high-paying manufacturing jobs in the U.S. due to lack of vocationally trained or technically competent workers. Second, our universities attract the best and brightest students from all over the world, yet upon completion of their studies we do very little to keep them here and sometimes do a lot to encourage them to leave.
I think the biggest threat is our the sort of macro set of issues that are there. And by macro I mean how the government works is the primary issue, because I think a lot of the core, the entrepreneurship, the innovation, the meritocracy is all there. But we're falling behind other countries that are moving much, much faster in that dimension. So to give you an example, I could spend 100% of my time with mayors and governments who are interested in other people's views about how to be more competitive, especially in Asia. Practically every city in China has an international advisory council. Korea, Seoul has one. I could just list Indonesia. Nigeria has that. And they're looking for ways to improve their productivity. They're looking for ways to improve how regulation works. It's not about getting rid of it. It's about how to make it more effective and really trying to push people to get those views. You just don't see that happening here in the U.S. There isn't that kind of a dialogue. And if there is, it's more for a photo op. It's not for getting something done.
Biggest threat to U.S. competitiveness and U.S. national security is debt. The fact that we as a nation borrow too much, save too little. The fact that we as a people borrow too much, save too little. This, more than anything else, is destroying our competitiveness, and it's also hurting our national security, because there's no instance in history where any nation continues to be a superpower once it loses its economic might.
I think the biggest threat to our competitiveness is the fact that the rest of the world's catching up. That some of the things that were unique to America are now being replicated in other parts of the world. That's particularly true when you think about entrepreneurship, that for decades the center of gravity around some of these great, particularly technology businesses, was America, particularly Silicon Valley. That's almost been the secret sauce that's driven our economy for decades. But others are catching up. They're kind of taking some of that secret sauce and replicating it, building up entrepreneurial ecosystems in other parts of the world. Meanwhile, I think we're a little bit at risk within our country of being a little complacent, kind of taking that for granted. So really redoubling our commitment to policies that are supportive of entrepreneurs and working in the private sector to develop entrepreneurial ecosystems all around the nation to really help launch the next generation of companies is very critical. I think we're at a really important point here, kind of a go left, go right moment, and it's really time to redouble our commitment to entrepreneurship.
One of the biggest gaps in the long-term competitive prospects of the U.S. is our K-12 education system. The relative performance of U.S. students versus the rest of the world, and the significant gaps we have between subgroups of students within the country by racial and economic factors are so stark that the long-term impact on those as the workforce changes are significant. So the quality of cognitive skills that our students are developing in our K-12 education system is one of the biggest blockers to long-term competitiveness.
You know, this is a very complicated set of issues, and the way for U.S. businesses to become more competitive, there are many things that need to occur. But if I had to sort of focus in on just one big message, it would be we need to see from the government, frankly, a long-term plan, long-term fiscal plan that's credible. I think that underpins so much of what's going on right now, and if we could remove that uncertainty, I think it's going to free businesses up to make the kind of investments they need for the future. It's going to free them up to create more meaningful jobs and so forth. And so it's really trying to get at that uncertainty, and the only way that's going to happen is for the leaders politically to come together and figure out exactly what we need to do long term. And there are a number of really sort of promising proposals out there that are bipartisan in nature, and we really need to get behind them.
There are many impediments to increasing America's competitiveness overseas, but I think foremost among them is the issue about tax reform. America's tax structure is rendering American companies non-competitive. we have a very complex and a very dense tax structure. The cost of our capital is so much more expensive than the cost of capital in many other competitive places overseas.
The greatest threat to American competitiveness is our long-term failure to invest adequately in public goods compared to what our global competitors are doing. Public goods include energy, telecommunications, transportation infrastructure, and education. We invest dramatically less in these areas than we once did. Our investment levels are falling, and our competitors globally are increasing.
One of the biggest threats is that we're not looking at the opportunities, but focusing too much on removing the barriers, and then forgetting that there are certain opportunities that we should pick up immediately. For example, I think there's rather than thinking about all the pressure that China is giving us, why not look at how to capture the tourism business from the Chinese? Hong Kong and even San Francisco, I notice, is benefiting tremendously from the Chinese tourist. How do we make it more attractive for Chinese tourists to come here? Make the visa application process easier, more friendly. Maybe have education for people to learn some Chinese, to service that customer. Look at opportunities, and it may not be related to China, but that happens to be just an area that I saw that was very interesting. So look at what are the opportunities. I am missing the attitude of that can-do attitude that I grew up in the States, and that's just something that is missing.
The biggest threat to American competitiveness is clearly the corporation's attitude towards Wall Street, which is to say that the sole job of the chief executive is to make profit and to deliver short-term returns. There are companies that need to take long-term strategies, and they have to do portfolio transformation, and they also need to dimensionalize their product lines, and they need to make the case to their investors that in fact this does take time and that there does need to be patience, and we cannot any longer fall victim to the quarterly earnings projections that so dominate thinking. And the smart CEO will say, I'm not going to give quarterly projections. In fact, show me after 3 years and I'll absolutely deliver you a great result.
I think globalization is both a wonderful opportunity but a big threat, and we got to figure out exactly what that means for us. We've got to get a lot better at competing around the world, exporting products. And for that matter, one of the things I see is there's a competition for jobs. Every country around the world is trying to figure out how to create more jobs for its own people. We're going to have to compete with that. And so globalization can turn out to be a threat unless we turn it into an opportunity.